the Holy One. There is no other Holy One in this universe. You alone are holy. You alone are worthy of praise. You alone have set the stars in their place, the sun and the moon in its orbits. We praise you, O God. We praise you that being the Holy One, you had a passion that we, your worthless creatures, should share your character and become worthy as you are. How can that be, O Lord? Why would you care that much? We don't understand it, but we praise you. We glorify your name. And we declare that the earth today is not full of our glory. It is not full of the glory of humanity, but it is full of your glory. A glory that you want to share with us. A glory that you, Christ Jesus, died on the cross that we might have. Oh, Father, glorify your people today, not for our sakes, but for your sake and for the world's. Help us as we study your word. Quicken our minds. Help me to be clear. Help me, Father, to say what you want said, and grant that every one of us will be fed because we have sat at the table of your word and your Spirit has applied that word to our hearts. In your name we pray. Amen. Again, it's so good to see each of you here this morning. Some of you, this may be your first time here. You've come in for the weekend. If that's so, let me tell you, we've been looking at the book of Ezekiel. And some of your friends and neighbors have triumphed. They have actually read through the book thus far. And I congratulate them. Congratulate you all for being here in God's house, in this place, these days. As I've said several times, my goal for this week is that you will have, if you've been here all through the week, you will have a sense of the overall structure and layout of this book. You'll know generally when it was written, you'll know why it was written, and you'll have a good sense of the flow of thought through the book. And so I have been unapologetically trying to each day take us back through what we have covered so far. As the old preacher said, first I tells them what I'm going to tell them, then I tells them, then I tell them what I done told them. So I'm trying to follow that good advice. The first segment of the book is chapters 1 to 3, the first division, Roman numeral 1. And what did we call it? The call, Ezekiel's call, as he sees the vision of God's glory, not merely in Jerusalem, but even here in Babylon. The second main division of the book, Roman numeral 2, is chapters 4 through 24. And what did we call that? Judgments upon Judah and Jerusalem. In that major division, chapters 4 to 24, there's an introduction. Destruction is sure in chapters 4 to 7. Then God's glory is removed from the temple in chapters 8 to 11. And then in chapters 12 through 24, I made a couple of subdivisions there to try to help us group things together. But really 12 through 24 is messages about that destruction. We called 12 through 17, that they may know I am the Lord. These judgments are going to come, that people may know I am the Lord, not just a little God who lives in Jerusalem somewhere. But as you've noticed, if you've been reading the book, the phrase, that they may know I am the Lord, is by no means restricted to 12 to 17. It occurs again and again and again. And if you've been marking with your pencil, you've got a lot of pencil marks in your book of Ezekiel under that phrase. But just to try to help us get things together, And then 18 to 24, we called Jerusalem's sins past and present. This whole question of responsibility. Is it my parents that are responsible? Or am I responsible? Or are we both in some way connected in this whole thing? And Ezekiel is dealing with that. Then we come to division 3. The announcement has come to Ezekiel at the end of 24. The siege of Jerusalem has begun on this very day. And on that day, Ezekiel's wife dies. The end of an era. The siege has begun. Ezekiel's lips are sealed for the next 2.5 years. Nothing to be said. Everything that needed to be said has been said. It's over. In a sense, this is what happened in the Old Testament with Malachi in 400. The lips of the Old Testament were sealed. Everything that needed to be said had been said. Now we simply had to wait for history to work its way out and the fullness of time to come with Christ. And so you've got that 400-year period of silence. In the same way, in that 2.5 years when the siege is going on and the Babylonian armies are steadily closing the noose around Jerusalem's neck, Ezekiel is silent. But for the book, between the announcement of the beginning of the siege and the announcement of Jerusalem's fall, which we find in chapter 33, between those periods, in chapters 25 to 32, we have a series of judgments against the nations. And we have the beginning of the promises of restoration then coming in 25 to 32. We closed yesterday morning talking about the pattern of the prophets. And let me just again quickly review those with you before we move on to glance at these messages against the nation and then look at 33, 34, and 35. Your assignment for tomorrow, mustn't forget that, chapters 36 to 39, just 4 chapters, easy one. Now, of course, the assignment for Sunday morning is going to be 40 to 48, so you may want to get started on that one. But we'll attempt tomorrow to get through chapter 39. Now, let me remind you of those elements in the pattern that we find in the prophets. God offers himself to the people. He offers a covenant. He offers to bless them. Initially they accept. But as soon as the going gets tough, they begin to say, oh no, this is too hard. They begin to repudiate their covenant, and they begin, instead of trusting God, to trust humanity, particularly the nations around them. And God tells them through the prophets, anything you trust in place of God will turn on you and destroy you. And sure enough, the nations, the former lovers, turn upon Israel and Judah. And God uses these nations according to the prophets. They are his tools. They think they're doing it just as a manifestation of their own dominating power. God says through the prophets, don't you believe it? God is using these nations that you trusted as his tool to try to get your attention and bring you back to him. But then the prophets go on and they say, but those nations are also responsible to God. Everybody must stand before God's judgment bar. And so the prophets say those nations are going to be judged for their cruelty, for their wickedness, their harshness. And God will deliver you from the nations. Again, The prophets say in very many different ways, you were called to be a light to the nations. But instead of doing that, you trusted the nations. God will have to deliver you from the nations in order that once again you may come to your real trust in Him. So here in Isaiah, here in Ezekiel, as in Isaiah and Jeremiah, you have this big section of judgment upon the nations. God saying, yes, I used them, but they too are under judgment. And eventually they will be judged and I will redeem you from them. So that's what we see here. And clearly Ezekiel has grouped all of the various messages that he received at any time during his experience as a prophet. He's grouped them together here, and he's grouped them topically rather than chronologically. If you checked on those years when he says the word of the Lord came to me in the 11th year, the 12th month, so forth, you'll see they're not in chronological order at all. In fact, 29:17, which is the in the first of the oracles against Egypt, was actually given in the year 571. It's the latest of all the dated prophecies of Ezekiel that we have. So he has put them here on purpose. He's grouped them according to nations, not according to when he received them. And he's put them at this point because this is the beginning of the promises of restoration. Don't worry about the nations. They didn't do what they did to you because of their own power. They did it because I permitted them, because I used them, and that permission has a sunset date on it. It'll come to an end. All right, now let's look at these nations that are mentioned here. The first one is the neighbors in chapter 25. The Ammonites. Now, I'll stand behind the map here, and you can look at it. This is the Dead Sea. You see it there? That's the Dead Sea. Over here is the Mediterranean. Out here, right on the coast of the Mediterranean, are the Philistines. Judah is here on the west side of the Dead Sea. Philistines are here. Edom is down here, south of Judah and around the bottom of the Dead Sea. Moab is over here on the east side of the Dead Sea, and the Ammonites are up here. So Ammon, Moab, Edom, and the Philistines are covered here. They are the near neighbors. But not only that, 3 of them are family. Remember? Ammon and Moab are the sons of the incestuous relationship between Lot's daughters and him. Edom are the descendants of Esau. So 3 of these people are family. The near neighbors, those who have gloated over Jerusalem's destruction. Oh, brother, big sis. She's lorded it over us all these years. Well, she got what was coming to her. Good for her. And God says, you can't say that about my beloved. But not only that, they had been, of course, political partners through all the years. These little nations, we'll make an alliance. We'll protect ourselves. Yes, right, Judah, we're right on your side. We Ammonites, we're really for you. And oh, yes, the Moabites, we really love you, Judah. We're on your side. And so Judah was tempted to trust these neighbors, these family members, who would get her out of a jam. And in fact, they were really enemies all the time. Glad to see you gone. And so what we have here in chapter 25 is a judgment upon human cruelty born out of envy and jealousy. And God pronounces his judgment upon it. How often our cruelty to one another is really, as in this case, springing out of our envy, our jealousy. And when we see a chance, when somebody is being spoken of well, oh yes, we're their friend, we're all for them. But let them start to fall. And how quickly the envy and jealousy that's been there all along begins to spring up. And, oh yes, well I knew, I just always sensed there was a real problem there. Yeah, what that says to me, maybe to you, is, oh God, deal with my heart now. Am I envious of someone who is presently in authority over me? Am I jealous of someone who seems to have some opportunities I don't have? Oh God, deal with that now, so that if they should fall, if something tragic would happen to them, I will not be among those who are saying, well, they had it coming to them, I knew it all along, good for them. Envy and jealousy. Adultery is terrible. Lying and cheating and stealing is awful. But deeper than all of that is envy and jealousy. They, as the church fathers have taught us, they are among the deadly sins. We move on then in chapters 26, 27, and 28 to the Phoenician cities. Now again, let's look at our map here. Here's Judah, here's the Phoenicians. You go up this way through the pass of Mount Carmel, and up here on the Mediterranean coast are the great Phoenician cities, especially Tyre and Sidon. These are Canaanite cities. Phoenicia, Canaan, same thing. The Phoenician language is essentially the Canaanite language. The Canaanite culture that Judah and Israel, to some extent, drove out of Israel itself, sort of ended up there on the Phoenician coast. These are the great seafarers of the ancient world. The Phoenician ships traveled all across the Mediterranean, and great wealth came to them. Tyre also was the seaport, the northern seaport for Judah and Israel. And they then would trade with Tyre. Goods from Tyre would come down to them and then be transshipped on down to the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, down the coast of Africa. So Judah was an important middleman. Good old Tyre. All their money is given to us to help us against all of our enemies. They're such wonderful partners with us in trade. And Ezekiel says in these chapters, don't you believe it? Tyre, when you fall, says, goody. One less middleman to have to deal with. One less person to divide our wealth with. And so what you see in these chapters, 26, 27, 28, is the picture of human arrogance and pride which is born out of wealth. And you see Tyre speaking of itself as God. I am God. Yes, yes. I wonder if in future years historians of the church in America will not say they were seduced by their wealth. There's nothing evil about money. God didn't make anything evil. But the greater the good of something, the greater the possibility for perversion. So rare is the wealthy person who does not in their heart believe, I am God. I'm self-sufficient. I don't need to worry about anything. I don't need to be concerned. I'll just build bigger barns. All is well. And friends, in the world scale, every one of us in this building is filthy rich. We really are. Now you say, boy, I'd like to show you my checkbook. I'd show you I'm not rich. I understand. There are lots and lots of people in the country who are a lot richer than we are. But, on the world standard, how easy it is. I don't need to pray. I've got a regular salary coming in. I don't need to pray for my daily bread. I've got enough bread in the bread box for 2 weeks. Have to eat it fast to keep it from spoiling. How easy it is to become God in my life and not to be daily dependent upon Him. Not to be daily recognizing, I need God, I'm not going to make it through this day. The poor person, they know they're not God. They know that if somehow something doesn't happen from beyond their ability, from beyond their resources, they're not going to make it. Now, I'm not suggesting we all ought to pray to be poor, because poverty also can be a grinding thing that simply absorbs your whole attention, and you don't have time for God there either. But these chapters, which speak about the riches of Tyre, its abundance, and again, Ezekiel really does a great job, doesn't he, in his descriptions of this. At one point he describes Tyre as a beautiful ship sailing across the ocean. All the beauty, all the provisions, all the possibilities, they're all there. I'm God. I don't need God. And God says, you want to bet? I can run your ship on a rock like that. Wasn't that a wonderful story last night about the guy in the ditch? Well, I can make your company go bankrupt in 24 hours if that'd help you. I can run your ship on a rock, and it's all gone in a moment. Is that bad news? Not necessarily. If it opens my eyes, if it takes the scales off my eyes, and I say, I need God. That's not a disaster. That's good news. That's good news. Now again, I don't think I'm going to pray for a disaster today, neither for me nor for you. But everything that the world might call a disaster is not necessarily a disaster. Now notice chapter 28. Turn there with me if you will. Verses 11 to 19. There's some unusual language here. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. So forth. Verse 14. You were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of fiery stones. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created till iniquity was found in you. Boy, that doesn't sound like an ordinary human being, does it? In fact, when you think about it, this is language that could very well be applied to Satan. And there are, again, the scholars are divided on this. Is he really talking about Satan here, or is he using this kind of gorgeous, poetic language just to try to make a point? This king of Tyre thinks he's God. Well, I'm not by any means an Ezekiel scholar, and I'm not in a position to give any final word on this by any means. However, my sense is that the type of all creaturely pride is Satan. So that the language that could be used to describe Satan can justly be applied to any of us who stand up on our hind legs and say, no. And in a sense, then, God can say to me, John, you were with me in the Garden of Eden. You had all perfection given to you. You had all possibility given to you. You were perfect. You were just the way you were supposed to be until iniquity was found in you. So I think that Ezekiel is using language that does describe Satan, but he's using it in a typological way. He's using it to say Satan is the type of all creaturely pride that is so foolish and so stupid. We move on to chapters 29 to 32. Yes, Judah relied upon her family, on her near neighbors, Ammon and Moab and Edom and the Philistines, and they failed her and turned against her. Yes, Judah relied upon Tyre, her trading partner, who would share her wealth. And all that wealth is useless because Tyre thinks it's God, and there's only one God in the world. And in the end, Tyre will be glad that you're gone, so you won't have to share the wealth. Now, what about Egypt? Yes. In all those years, when the Babylonians are coming and going, in the background, down there in the southwest is Egypt, saying, I'll help you, I'll help you. The influence of Egypt in the ancient world was amazing. They were looked upon, it's not correct, but they were looked upon as the oldest culture in the world. Actually, the Sumerians over in southern Mesopotamia were a little older. But in the ancient world, Egypt was considered to be the oldest, the most glorious culture. So much of their art canons shaped the art of the whole world. And so people were just sort of in awe of Egypt. Even when Egypt was dumb and helpless, it was, wow, isn't Egypt great? And so Judah had said, all right, we'll make it. Egypt will help us. We can depend on Egypt with all their wealth, with all their power, with all their wisdom, with all their understanding. We'll make it. We'll make it. Don't worry. And in fact, Jehoiakim had repudiated his covenant with Nebuchadnezzar and entered into a covenant with Egypt, and that's how he got in the mess that resulted in the first surrender in 598. Egypt, they'll take care of us. Actually, Ezekiel says with some more of his pretty crude language, you know what Egypt is? A worn-out old crocodile stomping up and down in its mud hole. It can't do a thing for you. It's a toothless crocodile. All it can do is sort of gum you to death. Egypt, it's a broken reed. When you lean on it, it snaps off and stabs you in the armpit. Why in the world would you go down there? And what we have here, if chapter 25 is a judgment on human cruelty growing out of envy and jealousy, if chapters 26 through 29 are a judgment on human self-sufficiency and pride growing out of wealth, here we have a judgment on that pride and self-sufficiency which comes from a long tradition of power and influence. And God says it is all worthless. It is all helpless. Don't trust your political partners. Don't trust your commercial partner. Don't trust your ancient ally and, remember, slave master. Egypt enslaved you. Egypt oppressed you. Why would you go back to it like a dog goes back to its own vomit? Isn't it amazing? We'll trust anything else.